What does system change mean to you? Probably not very much. Working, studying, paying the bills, raising a family, life is complicated enough. And you were just one person in a global population of billions. The big issues, well, they're meant to be left to the politicians. Take climate change. We all know the climate is changing. Every month there seems to be a new weather record being broken somewhere. Extreme heat, extreme storms, extreme flood, extreme wildfires. We know that if we continue to burn fossil fuels and drive global warming even higher, we risk everything falling apart. The good news is that there is a route out of this crisis. That is the path to a fair and sustainable world, to a zero carbon world. And that means system change. In this film, we go behind the headlines about climate change to show how vitally important you are in our efforts to avert disaster. We want to inspire you to take action, not because of fear, but because of hope. Climate change threatens to destroy everything that we value, that we love. But it could be the point when we finally confront some of the destructive forces in our societies. It could be the point when we realize we have the power to produce profound change. Change that could protect people and planet. This change will be opposed by some of the world's most powerful organizations and politicians. But while daunting, history shows us that societies can produce profound change. They can change the system. We can win. This is the challenge of our generation. This is the task that we must do now.
Right now, we're headed on a trajectory that will see global temperatures rise by around 3 degrees by the end of the century, okay? Like, this is effectively in the lifetimes of the younger generation, okay? 3 degrees may not sound like very much, but it is utterly catastrophic. We're talking about at least 1.5 billion people being displaced from their homes by fires, droughts, rising seas, extreme heat, sustained food supply disruptions globally in several different regions at once, driving famines and severe social dislocation. Okay, this is not a future that is compatible with organized human civilization.
It is unbelievable to think that governments have let us get into a situation where our futures are imperiled. But that's where we are. We need to turn that disbelief into energy, to push governments to make the changes that are needed. The only way governments have changed course in the past is when millions of people have come together to force them to change direction. When you realize that, it is extraordinarily empowering. And then the next thing you have to do is go out your front door and get involved with that collective effort.
The thing to remember about climate action is if you get involved, you're going to join the winning team. Like, we're going to win. We are going to be the ones that build the world that our kids inherit and that everyone goes on to enjoy in the future. However, how fast we win is the question. So we need people to get involved, because the more people we have involved, the quicker we win.
Join the winning team, be on the right side of history, be on the right side of a brighter future.
We often talk about the environmental crisis as if it's like a storm on the horizon, right? And we're all in a boat here, and a number of us are warning, guys, if we carry on the current trajectory, we'll go into the storm, right? And we just need to make some changes and we'll miss the storm and it'll be fine. But that didn't happen. And we need to have more honesty now to admit that we carried on and we entered the storm. And when you're in a storm, you don't just need to worry about trying to get out of it, right? You've got to deal with the fact that the storm is hitting the boat, and fear, a hole in the hull, a few of your crewmates saying, I'm going to get out of here and jumping on the lifeboat, could distract from the core challenge, which is to get yourselves out so the storm doesn't ultimately overwhelm you. When you're in younger generations, and this is happening, we're starting to understand that we're going to be piloting that ship in the storm. And the challenge is far different to what current leaders talk about, because they essentially grew up in a world where they were piloting it not in the storm. Younger generations will increasingly be in the storm, and that presents a whole different set of challenges.
Yeah, we have to change direction very, very fast. We're out of time already, so we're making good on decades of inertia, decades of inaction. We've got to reduce our emissions globally by at least 50% in this decade, from the 2020s to the 2030s. We have to catch up in this decade, and that's the last sort of chance that we have. We have to get those policy changes, we have to get the laws, we have to get companies changing their business practices right now. We have to reduce and change our own lifestyles right now. It's like a race, we now have to sprint much faster, and that burden is going to fall on younger people and younger demographics now.
For us to have any hope of avoiding dangerous climate change, then we must stop the development of new oil and gas. There are already more than enough fossil fuels to drive us towards catastrophe. Unfortunately, governments refuse to listen to this key demand. For example, the UK continues to grant new licenses for the extraction of oil and gas in the North Sea, while around the world, fossil fuel companies pour hundreds of billions of dollars into the exploration and development of new fossil fuels. When people protest against such actions, they're often portrayed as some sort of extremists in the media. But it's the fossil fuel companies and their enabling politicians, bankers and newspapers that are the real extremists here. It's their addiction to the power and money produced by fossil fuels that risk propelling civilization towards catastrophe. Now, climate protesters can raise awareness on this issue, but they can never win this fight on their own. "40 years ago, we would have been able to make gradual changes to our society and avoid dangerous climate change. Decades of delay means that now only bold and radical action will keep us safe. Only politicians are able to produce the sort of system change that the situation now demands.
I think we're living through an epic battle between a system that is being birthed as we speak, that is based on compassion, is based on kindness to nature, is going to respect the Earth's boundaries, and those who are desperately hanging on and have not, read the memo, basically, that this is an inevitability.
It's the responsibility of the government not only to protect its people, but to protect its people's access to natural resources, to what's called the public trust. And the public trust states that the government has a fiduciary responsibility to protect the air, the running waters, and the seas for young generations and for our posterity, for future generations.
We've kind of been cast as superheroes that have to save the world, and I don't know about you, but I don't really want to have to play that role. It seems really exhausting. I'd much rather be having a quiet life, but that is kind of what we've been stuck with. So I think we need to just put on those capes and go out and do the best we can and embrace it.
crucial things that people need to recognize is our existing system is just simply not working. It's a tremendous waste of human life, actually. We spend our time working in a system that is actively destroying our ecology, destroying our future, and failing at the same time to meet basic human needs. In the meantime, what is it for? It's organized primarily around enriching elites, right? This is not a reasonable economic system. We should be able to agree that we can collectively produce a better economy, one that meets human needs within the limits of our ecology, and while allowing our living world to flourish. So imagine this, right? We're trying to decarbonize the existing global economy. That's difficult enough to do, okay? Now, imagine trying to decarbonize the global economy twice over in the same amount of time. Even more difficult to do, right? And that's effectively the path that we're on, because the exponential tendency of economic growth means that we're going to roughly double the size of the world economy by the middle of the 21st century, in exactly the same period of time that we're supposed to be reaching zero emissions, right? So given the contradictions here, it becomes clear that we have a choice. Either we can succeed in creating a sustainable future, or we can continue to pursue growth as usual. But we can't do both, okay? And this is just the fact of it. The physical reality that we face is that if we want to achieve our climate objectives and keep temperatures under 1.5 degrees, then high-income nations will have to abandon growth as an objective and actively scale down unnecessary forms of production and energy use. Just to illustrate the conundrum a little bit further, over the past 2 decades, there's been an extraordinary expansion of renewable energy output, right? Like, we've really put a lot into this, and we've been successful at generating new solar and renewable energy output, to the tune of about 8 billion megawatts over this period, right? During the exact same period, economic growth has caused global energy use to rise by an additional 40+ billion megawatts, right? Effectively outstripping the gains from our new renewable energy output. It's kind of like running up a down escalator, if you will.
Each year, our industrialized societies pump out tens of billions of tons of carbon dioxide. Global temperatures will continue to increase until that reaches zero. That is a monumental task. Continued economic growth makes it even harder. Traditionally, we've seen economic growth as the savior of humanity. It has transformed the lives of billions of people. Today, the argument is that we need growth and innovation to power a new green revolution. But if this growth produces even larger environmental impacts, then it may be making the situation worse. Perhaps we've got it wrong. Perhaps economic growth isn't the hero here, it's the villain. At this point, we need to ask ourselves, what are our economies for? If it's to improve the lives of those who have the least, those who struggle to pay food and energy bills, then we may not need larger economies. Instead of trying to increase the total size of the pie, instead we could think about how the pie is cut up and who gets which slice. You may hear the argument that politicians would like to take action on the climate crisis, but they fear the consequences of meddling with our economic systems. But there is tremendous support for climate-friendly policies. The United Nations' largest ever study on climate change opinions showed across the globe a clear majority support policies that would avert the worst impacts of climate change. Many people assume that those who want decisive action to be taken on the climate crisis are in the minority. Thankfully, the opposite is true. A clear majority of people support bold climate action. The climate crisis is getting worse, but the popular movement needed to solve it, it's already here. What we need to do is get politicians, bankers, industrial leaders to act. Act not in desperation to maintain economic growth, whatever the costs, but act to help people lead good, decent lives in a safe and stable climate.
There's two parts to addressing the climate change crisis. So we hear a lot about reducing greenhouse gas emissions around the world, and that's called climate change mitigation. But there's another side of the climate change coin, and that's adaptation. And that's much less known about, but no less important. And what adaptation is about protecting ourselves against the climate change that is already happening and that we might expect to see happen in the future. It's like getting in a car and putting your seatbelt on. You want to protect yourself from potential risks, from potential hazard, and we have to be doing that with climate change as well. So it's about improving our resilience to extreme weather hazards and also planning for the long term, because we will be living in a different climate in 10, 20, 30, 50 years' time.
The news is usually dominated by the direct impacts of the climate crisis. Take the summer of 2021. There was what was called a heat dome, made it very hot in North America, and the resultant wildfires completely destroyed the Canadian village of Lytton. What was not on the news was the next knock-on effect. People who lived in Lytton were displaced, their health was impacted, their jobs were disrupted, and so on, right? What then didn't make the news into the winter was that the wildfires had burned the landscape and made it really susceptible to the flooding that then happened, which then smashed up roads and railways, which disrupted Canadian trade. And it's that kind of cascade, that ripple effect that we've really got to worry about. We may look at the news and see the fires and the other things that we associate from the climate crisis and think, oh, we could survive those individual physical events. But it's those rippling effects that we've really got to be worried about. Right now, a few places globally grow a lot of our food. The chances of them being hit at the same time by extreme fire or storms is right now about 0. By 2040, the chance of them getting hit at the same time could be as much as 50%. What that then means is that the crop would be destroyed, or part of the crop would be destroyed, prices would spike, there wouldn't be enough food available, and what started off as a crisis of food production would very quickly become a crisis of a lack of food, which becomes a health crisis. There's the economic crisis because of all the people that have been hit by higher food prices. It then becomes a political crisis because people are rightly demanding from their leaders that they need to be fed. It could then become a social crisis. People are excluded, their lives don't develop properly. It could then become a global crisis because all of these countries are impacted. They're fighting over for more food or other things that they can't get access to. Is that kind of rippling, cascading effect in food that people are most concerned about into the future.
There are things that we can do now to avert climate catastrophe, things we can do now to begin to unpick the most pernicious elements of our system. For that, we need absolutely everybody. So join us. We need you.
It's very easy to get involved in the climate movement. As long as you're doing something, you're involved. So the 26th UN Climate Conference, COP26, it was here in Glasgow. So people from all over the world, around 30,000, 40,000 people came here to make their voices heard on climate change. So we had to protest, and on the middle Friday we organised a strike which 30,000 people came to, and I think it was honestly incredible. We marched through the entire city, and our rally, we had speakers from all over the world sharing their experiences right now, because especially in the global north we can sometimes think that it's just a future problem and that people haven't already lost their homes and there aren't already famines, and I really think we got that point across to all the people who came.
We can't handle it anymore. It's in your hands to change the world, but you're not doing it. We need a systemic change.
We need to continue holding leaders accountable for their actions. We cannot keep quiet about climate injustice. Your actions matter. No action is too small to make a difference, and no voice is too small to make a difference.
Over 50% of all our CO2 emissions have occurred since 1990, and about a third since 2005. All this while the media is reporting on what people in power say that they are going to do, rather than what they actually do. They cannot ignore our screams as we reclaim our power. We are tired of their blah, blah, blah. Our leaders are not leading. This is what leadership looks like.
Climate change has got to go, hey, hey, ho, ho. Climate change has got to go, hey, hey, ho, ho. Climate change has got to go, hey, hey.
Organising the protest at COP took a lot of effort, just because so many different things were happening at that time, but there were so many things you had to do as well. You have to liaise with the council, you have to liaise with the police, you have to get march permits, you have to actually get people to come. You have to organise security, because of course we had Greta Thunberg there, and we can't just let the press mob her. We had to organise a stage, we had to organise a programme. After COP, I think all of us felt fairly burned out. We're at 1.1 degrees increase, and we're already seeing measurable differences in the climate. So it's here, and it's here right now. And if that's it at 1.1 degrees, imagine how much worse it could be at 2 degrees. Imagine how much worse it could be at 3 degrees. So it's bad now. We have to prevent it from being absolutely catastrophic.
What do we want? Climate justice! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Climate justice! When do we want it? Now! What do we want?
I became involved in Extinction Rebellion and civil disobedience because there's a sense of urgency and desperation about the fact that change is not happening and not happening fast enough. And if we look at history and what it really takes to create a real shift in society's opinion and priorities, we see movements like the suffragettes, we see movements like the civil rights movement, and these movements started by people really standing up for something that they believed was right. I've seen a lot of different attempts, such as marches, such as writing to MPs, such as all kinds of organisations that have been active on climate over the past few decades, but it's not affecting change fast enough. The aim to act like it's an emergency and behave as if it's an emergency, because if somebody sits in your front room and tells you your house is on fire but they're drinking a cup of tea, you're not going to believe them. And when scientists tell us that these things are really urgent and people don't go out on the streets and say, wow, what are we going to do? People sort of had the impression that it can't really be true, or perhaps it's all in hand.
The world can't bear it. We are giving you a message and you can share it. It's destroying the planet as an entire nation. We need to help the next generation. Mother Earth is dying, but it doesn't have to be.
Ultimately, do you sit back and let the unthinkable become reality? Or do you get stuck in and try and make the impossible at least somewhat possible? And that's what we're here for. We think about 3 different levels of action. So you've got what can you do at the personal level, which is something you can just change without needing anyone's permission or needing to get anyone else involved in your own life. Then there's the action you can take at a social level. So that is with other people. And then there's the political level, which is actually trying to advocate for, structural changes in the way that we basically organise society and the economy. Another example of the work that we do that you might think is cliche, but actually is just a perennial favourite for people when they think about the kind of action that they want to get involved in is our tree planting programme.
One of the things that we love so much about tree planting as a response is that it is so tangible. It is not like writing a letter to your MP or signing a petition or even going on a protest, and those things are all really important. This is literally spades in the ground, getting your hands dirty, right? Dirty hands, and at the end of the day, we can look back and survey what we did, and we can see the change that we've made. All up and down these hedgerows behind me, where people are planting, people are having conversations about climate change and their own journeys in relation to it, realising how serious of a problem it is, how profound of a challenge to our society, and how we need to change everything in response to it. And those are the conversations that are taking place right now between all different people from different generations and different parts of the world.
We can generate the political will that's required for this really big change by demanding it. It won't happen unless we demand it. This is the connection between ordinary people and big governments. Governments have to do what people want, otherwise they end up not being government anymore. But we've forgotten that the power is actually in our hands. It's in our hands, it's in our phones, it's in our conversations, it's in our bodies. It's just up to us to decide to take it.
It's fundamentally down to people to push their governments to make the right decisions. Governments don't act in a vacuum. So if they see and hear the demand for change, that is what the politicians listen to. And it's really for our governments, our politicians, to enact different legislation, different laws, and to respond to the demand for change. As important as changing your lifestyle is, that will only get you some of the way, and don't feel too bad and beat yourself up if your life isn't perfectly green. No one's life is and can be until those bigger changes are underway.
This is a CBS News special. Earth Day, a question of survival. For 2 hours, fashionable Fifth Avenue was off-limit to automobiles and became a crowded pedestrian mall.
When we say we've known about it, that is lots of people around the world. Scientists have known about it, politicians have known about it. Congress were first briefed on the connection between carbon dioxide and global warming in 1957. This is not a new issue. So an awareness of carbon dioxide as a problem, by then actually a whole expanded idea of greenhouse gases, like methane and CFCs, started to build so that by the 1980s, it could reach a tipping point and really get into mainstream public attention. So you see some really big reports and discussions about it. And then by the 1980s, you see politicians getting ready to compete to be who wants to be the leader on this issue. And people like Thatcher see an opportunity and start talking about it. Al Gore's been talking about it for years. He stands for election, starts talking about it.
Action proposed by the administration. It is, in fact, I will state my opinion, the single most serious problem human civilization has ever confronted. Mr. President, to put out an announcement, as the administration did, claiming that they will stabilize greenhouse gas emissions in the year 2000, is to try and convince the American people and the rest of the world that they're doing something that they're really not proposing to do. The essence of leadership is to look ahead and identify problems and propose solutions for those problems while the solutions are feasible, while they can be effective. The essence of political cowardice is to see the problem and fail to act because of fear that the political consequences of doing something about the problem will be painful in the short term. That's what we're seeing right now from the Bush administration, where the global environmental crisis is concerned.
I think one of the problems with the climate movement so far is that it is focused on this idea of let us just demand that our governments keep temperatures under 1.5 degrees. Let us demand that they commit to net zero by 2050, etc. The problem with that demand is that it leaves all sorts of wiggle room for governments to basically lie to us. They're going to promise to stay under 1.5 degrees. They're going to promise to reach net zero by 2050. But in reality, they will not make the changes necessary because they're going to say, well, you know, once I'm out of office, then it's not my problem anymore. And more importantly, we're just going to rely on the hope. There will be technology that exists to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. This is negative emissions technology. Most of politicians' claims about net zero by 2050 rely to a large extent on this assumption of negative emissions technology coming down the pipeline in the future. Scientists warn against this over and over again. We cannot rely on that assumption. It is extremely dangerous. It is a gamble with human civilization and with life on Earth itself. And that is not acceptable.
Decades of delay to act on the climate and ecological crisis means we now need an emergency stop of fossil fuel use. The most obvious way to do that would be for politicians to summon the bravery to directly challenge fossil fuel interests. Unfortunately, politicians continue to duck their responsibilities. They continue to insist that we can avoid dangerous climate change while doing nothing to affect the drivers of climate change. Instead, they invoke technological solutions, such as future machines that will suck out billions of tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. This is taking an extraordinarily reckless gamble that such technologies will emerge in time. It also represents a massive debt, a burden, that we're imposing on our children, on future generations, because it is they who will need to develop, deploy, and run these technologies for potentially centuries. If carbon removal technologies do not work, then the only hope our children may have to avoid catastrophe could be geoengineering, the direct manipulation of the Earth system in an attempt to reduce global temperatures. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with researching geoengineering or carbon removal, but we can't be naive about how such work could be used to justify continued fossil fuel use today. It may also be the case that the hype surrounding these technological solutions is effectively crowding out urgently needed discussions we need to have about how our economies function. Rather than entertain ideas of systems change, politicians instead entertain fantasies of bending the entire climate system to their will.
It's almost as if we're told that the environmental crisis is our fault, that the failures of the system are our fault. So we've got to change our behaviour, and we've got to change our light bulbs, we've got to make different purchasing decisions and so on. That is right. We should be making those kind of changes. But we need to flip it around and target those who are most in control of the system. For governments, the point of politics now has got to be to change our systems, to make them work for all people and for planet. We need to go after corporations and businesses, those in fast fashion and other things that are complicit in the destruction of the planet and the exploitation of people. We can do that by changing our buying behaviour and by pushing activism towards those companies. But more than anything, we need to go for the people who are behind the system, who fund the system, the banks and other financial institutions, and put pressure on them to change where that money goes. And we should never let those who have the most power off the hook. Often we talk about the environmental crisis without a bad guy in it. I mean, all stories, major stories in the world have a bad guy. We need to be pointing the finger at the fossil fuel companies, at the fast fashion companies, at the banks that fund them to the tunes of tens of billions of dollars since we signed the Paris Agreement. We should never, ever let our focus drift from those organizations, those institutions, those leaders who are the most complicit in continuing the system as it stands, the one that is driving us towards disaster.
I think we have to recognize that we have lost time and that fundamental changes are already underway, that the planet has changed. We have toxified the atmosphere, the soils. There are water shortages that will impact huge numbers of people. And I'm talking about hundreds of millions of people. So we cannot shy away from that. But I think the answer to that is not to give up and despair and say all is lost, but to resist and fight to change.
So the implications of sea level rise are that coastal, low-lying places will be at increasing risk of flooding. Flooding from the sea happens from time to time when we get a storm, for example. With the sea level already being risen as a background to this, when a storm comes, the flooding will be worse, unless we've put in place increased flood defences, which won't always be possible.
Yeah, when we look at flood risk maps for the future, it's important to think about the assumptions behind those maps. So often they ignore the presence of flood defences. And what they're showing is the level of risk, so not necessarily the level of annual flooding. But that being said, we know that the area at significant risk of coastal flooding could double, could even triple in the future because of climate change. We may well be locked into a metre of sea level rise sometime in the future. I think that's probably quite likely based on the science that's been done.
So degrowth is very straightforward. It's simply a planned reduction of excess resource and energy use in high-income nations to bring the economy back into balance with the living world in a safe, just, and equitable way, right? It's quite simple to think about what this might look like, okay? I mean, it sounds maybe abstract, but in reality, it's quite simple. Like anybody who just pays attention to the economy can see there are huge chunks of the economy that are really irrelevant to our everyday human needs, right? And that can obviously be scaled down without impinging on the things that we actually need to, to live good lives. So think about the practice of planned obsolescence, whereby corporations seek to make products last, effectively shrink their lifespan so that we have to buy more in order to increase product turnover and profits and so on. Think about, industrial beef. Think about fast fashion. Think about private jets, SUVs, McMansions, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there are huge chunks of our economy that could be scaled down, thus reducing energy use, taking extraordinary pressure off of our planets, while at the same time allowing us to live good lives. And that's effectively what degrowth is calling for. We're in the middle of an ecological and climate emergency. If there are sectors that are clearly not necessary, we should scale those down so as to reduce energy use, reduce resource use, et cetera. People regard this as sensible. They agree with it. The question everybody wants to ask is, what about jobs? Let's say we agree to scale down SUV production. We agree to scale down private jet production. We agree to scale down fast fashion, things like that. Clearly, our world is going to be better in such a scenario. But what about jobs? Won't this lead to crazy levels of unemployment, et cetera? Well, the answer that ecological economists give to this is very straightforward, and that's simply that as the economy requires less labor, you shorten the working week, okay? You distribute necessary labor more evenly across the population. Effectively, we take the dividends of this in terms of leisure time. And we can do this without a loss of wages. We can ensure that everybody has fair living wages in this context at the same time. So you shorten the working week, you introduce something like a climate job guarantee at the same time to eliminate the question of unemployment altogether. We know for a fact that growth itself never eliminates the problem of unemployment, even though they tell us it will. But the solution is really quite simple. You introduce a climate job guarantee and ensure that anyone who wants to can shift away from whatever industry they're presently working in, if we want to scale that one down, and move into forms of production that are really essential in the middle of a climate and ecological emergency, right? So everything from producing renewable energy capacity to building, public transport systems, to regenerating ecosystems and woodlands, things like that. There's a lot of work to be done in order to make our economy compatible, our society compatible with our ecology. And it's not going to happen on its own. And so something like a climate job guarantee can ensure that people can make that transition and do socially meaningful, ecologically necessary, dignified work, contributing to the most important collective projects of our generation.
We haven't got long left to save the planet, but just now we need free and accessible public transport that gets cars off the road. We need mass redistribution of wealth, power and resources globally. We need a just transition which at its core has the interests of people and planet, and we need an inherent radicalism to each of the decisions we take, and of course we need an immediate halt to the extraction of fossil fuels.
We can see we're faced with two options. We can either take this moment right now and address the climate challenge and rise to the occasion, or we can continue to do nothing. Our governments can continue to actively perpetuate climate change, and my generation will be the ones dealing with it for the foreseeable future.
I don't think people understand how much governments are letting them down right now. Governments need to act like this is an emergency because this is an emergency. Change in the system always comes back to government. It is through government that we as a society can come together to make massive changes. Governments right now are failing us, contrary to what their rhetoric says, to the fact that they've got targets and so on and so forth. They are not making the emergency action that we need. Imagine if at the beginning of the pandemic, governments didn't act as if it was an emergency. We're in the same situation now when it comes to the environmental crisis. And so we have to demand that change of governments. We need to be out there doing all we can to force governments to change laws, to make the investments that are needed, to change our system. That's what we need.
People can always change and have always changed systems. And in hindsight, it's easier to see that in the past than to maybe realize that, in fact, the same kind of seismic shift, the same kind of revolution is happening already. So it's much easier looking back and saying, yes, people worked towards the abolition of slavery, people worked to establish trade union rights, people established, gender equality, people established anti-discrimination legislation, people got rid of apartheid. All of these systems at the time seemed enormous and overwhelming and so powerful, and were powerful. But over time, resistance by people changed through our political system, petitions, marches, non-violent civil disobedience, and fundamentally people's consciousness changed to reject these systems. But I think in the case of climate change, it's a distillation of all of those different struggles to provide now a system that is respectful of everyone's human rights, is respectful of nature, is kind and compassionate, and that is built in.
So I think it's really unlikely that most of our politicians will be willing to implement degrowth policy, partly because of kind of corporate and elite influence in our political system, and partly because most politicians are just kind of under the assumption that they need to target GDP growth in order to stay in office and get reelected. So it's going to be important for us to build the social movements that are necessary to push existing incumbents to change course on this, or to unseat them and seize political power where we can. In order to achieve this kind of transition and push our politicians to where they need to be, this is going to require strong alliances between environmentalist movements and working class movements. The potential of an alliance between environmentalists and unions is extremely powerful, and politicians, incumbents, will quake in the face of such a movement. That is the movement that brought climate onto the agenda, and it's also the movement that has accomplished all of the key social gains that have ever been achieved in our society. Bringing these two forces together will be unstoppable. And this is what has to happen, not in 10 or 20 years. It has to happen now. This has to be the decade that we mobilize these alliances, that we mobilize this kind of movements.
Right now, we get to be part of the biggest global movement there has ever been. And all we need to do is decide to take action. All you need to do is decide to take action. You can do that today. It's a really easy thing to get involved in. You can do the smallest thing today, and then another thing tomorrow, and then you're part of this incredible movement. And bit by bit, we will find that there are more and more people getting involved, doing everything they can to deliver this huge change, which we can, and we will, because everybody's joining in now, and that is how we win.
I think we're at a time we need to completely rethink our systems. Everything we've done was designed, centuries ago, when we didn't have the challenges we face now. The changes we need to see are long-term. They go way beyond electoral cycles. I would like to see a new form of government. I would like to see citizen assemblies take the place of, say, the House of Lords, for example. So you can have direct participative democracy by people who are invested in the long term, not just up to the next 4-year cycle. So we're operating from cycle to cycle. That is not consistent with long-term sustainable viewpoints. We need a new contract between citizens and governments. So having citizens' assemblies will enable that new contract and I think really engage citizens, feeling part of the process. If you want to take action, you have to look at it as a jigsaw. Everyone can do a bit in the jigsaw. No one piece of the jigsaw will solve the puzzle. So if you're an individual, you can help let businesses and government know what you want. You can choose your consumer choices. So wherever you are, you have a part to play in that jigsaw.
The difference, the kind of movement from just absorbing what's going on to actually responding to what's going on, that's the crucial boundary that you cross when you do something. Arguably, the easiest stuff to start with is thinking about what you can change in your own life. It involves maybe thinking what you can swap in for things that you can swap out. So one of the biggest things you can do if you drive a lot is potentially swap in a bike or swap in walking a little bit more. And you might find that it actually makes you feel better as well. So that's one thing to think about. Another is what you eat. Thinking about whether or not you can shift, even just by a little bit to start with, so that on balance, you're probably eating a low carbon diet. So on a personal level, some easy things to start off with. And yeah, if you want to take it further, then it's about seeing what projects are out there. Maybe projects in your local area, maybe nationwide campaigns that take your interest. I mean, there really is no shortage of things to go out there and get involved in. And of course, Possible is there to help.
Everybody has a role to play. Everybody can go out and do something. Doesn't matter how small it is, it all makes a difference to reducing climate risk. And helping to protect the natural environment is such a key part of adaptation. Join your local wildlife trust, obviously, would be a really good thing to do.
Everybody can make 1 or 2 changes that are really profound, whether it's to switch to a plant-based diet or to change jobs or decide to commute to work in a different way. But on their own, these changes won't be enough unless they also see that they must be part of a much bigger set of political changes. So to anyone out there, please do consider, educate yourself, but always join a movement, join protests, join and see how our political system can change and make the really big picture much easier and nicer for everyone in the long run.
Climate change, it's real, it's here, and it's killing people. The simple and brutal fact is that the longer we power our civilization with fossil fuels, the more people will die. All governments accept this, and all governments understand that we must stop burning coal, oil, and gas. The vital question is how fast this happens. Winning slowly, gradually weaning ourselves off fossil fuels in order to preserve the economic and political power of today isn't much better than losing. Everything, everywhere, all at once. That's the change that we need now. An entirely new world is possible. We don't have to sacrifice communities and ecosystems in the pursuit of never-ending economic growth. Hundreds of millions of people can see the outlines of this new world, and they're taking action for climate justice to make it a reality. We will win. The end of the age of fossil fuels is inevitable. What you can do is help us win faster. Join the global movement and take action today. Talk to your friends, family and work colleagues about climate change. Tell your elected politicians to take action on the climate and ecological crisis and that these issues are important to you. Find out what your place of work is doing and help empower it to become a positive force for change. Connect with groups, locally or online. Working with others can amplify your power. It can also make long and lasting friendships. We all have a role to play. It's our future. Let's work together to make a world that we're not afraid of, that we would love to call our home.
you.